Good morning, women of strength. Today we have an awesome episode for you. And I know you're all awesome. Like all these episodes are awesome, but this one is pretty stinking awesome and unique. It's actually, I don't know if you guys remember Chelsea back in the day when we recorded.
She was like episode 4.
Yeah, 4 or 5 maybe. She had a VBAC after 2 C-sections. That was Breech. And today we have Grace with us, and she also had a Breech VBAC after 2 cesarean birth. And to throw in the extra uniqueness, this was all during COVID-19 and when restrictions and policies were changing all the time and new things were happening. And man, did she get a lot of curveballs thrown her way. We were talking a little bit before about how probably I would have been so stressed, like I really would have, but she was like so calm and just amazing through all of it. So I cannot wait to hear the story, but I'm going to turn over the time to Julie really fast to read the review of the week.
All right. I'm also so excited to talk to Grace, and we're going to talk a little bit more about her after our intro. But I wanted to read a review from our Loveland, and the title is Love, Love, Love. And this is from Apple Podcasts, and she said, "This is a podcast I wish I had been able to listen to when I was expecting my first 2 children. Luckily, I was here for my 3rd pregnancy. I went into my 3rd pregnancy wanting a VBAC after 2 C-sections, but feeling totally ignorant on everything birth-related. I found the VBAC link early on and listened to every episode during my 90-minute one-way drive to the nearest VBAC supportive provider. I learned so much from the episodes, and the fear and uncertainty I felt at the beginning of pregnancy slowly faded away the more I listened and the more I learned from Julie and Megan. Thank you for spending your precious time sharing your wisdom and experience with us. Y'all are so inspiring. So inspiring. Expire? Do we expire?
We're expired?
No, we inspire. You are so inspiring and empowering. In December, we welcomed our 3rd child via VBAC after 2 C-sections. I felt so knowledgeable and prepared for the birth. Thanks to you ladies. Knowledge is power. Heart emoji. I love that. I picked that one specifically because it's VBAC after 2 C-sections, just like this episode.
Awesome. Good job. You always do stuff like that. It works out.
Well, this one I did on purpose. The other stuff is like hippie woo magic, like universe, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
Kind of creepy, kind of awesome. I don't know. It's a good mix.
You are tuned in to the VBAC Link podcast with Julie Francom and Megan Heaton, VBAC moms, doulas, and educators here to help you get inspired for birth after having a C-section. Together, they have created a robust VBAC preparation course along with this uplifting podcast for women who are preparing for their VBAC. Although these episodes are VBAC specific, they encourage all expectant moms to listen and educate themselves on how to avoid a cesarean from the get-go. The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is not meant to replace advice from any other qualified medical professional. Here are your hosts, Julie and Megan.
Do you want a VBAC but don't know where to start? It's easy to feel like we need to figure it all out on our own. That's what we used to do, and it was the loneliest, most ineffective thing we have ever done. That's why Megan and I created our signature course, How to VBAC, the ultimate preparation course for parents that you can find at thevbaclink.com. It is the most comprehensive VBAC preparation course in the world, perfectly packaged in an online, self-paced video course. Together, Megan and I have helped over 800 parents get the birth that they wanted, and we are ready to help you too. Head on over to thevbaclink.com to find out more and sign up today. That's thevbaclink.com. See you there.
Okay, well, we cannot wait to dive in. We want to give you all the time, Grace, to be able to share this story with all of these listeners. And I literally can't wait because I have been following. If you guys didn't know this about Grace, she has a podcast of her own. It's called All In with the Allens. So her and her husband, Ricardo, they have a podcast together and they share just such a wide topic of life. And her husband's an NFL player, so they talk about that and they talk about life and raising kids. And lately, she has been sharing her pregnancy journey and update and her reason why she wanted to VBAC and all of these things. So it's been so fun. If you really go listen to their podcast. They're super fun to listen to. I think Grace, are you on all platforms? I listen to you on Apple.
Yes.
Okay.
Apple, Spotify, and Google.
Perfect. So there you go, you guys. Go find them and give them a listen. You're going to fall in love with them just like we have.
So
and
sweet. Thank you.
Really, though, really. I love you guys. And yeah, we're so honored that you're with us today and would love to turn the time over to share these amazing stories. And if you would, share a little bit about your first two. I know the first one was Breech, right?
Correct.
And the second. So wasn't Breech, though, right? Like you just...
That's right.
Because your doctor was like... you're not going to do this. Like, you're not going you're in prodromal labor, but you're not going into labor. So share us the story.
And
wait.
Yes.
Before we get into the story, I have to tell a story.
Oh, okay. Sorry,
You know
Grace.
me. I always interrupt you, Megan, and I always am distracted and sharing stories. But I have to tell you about the time that Grace messaged us on Instagram. Completely unexpected. But she messaged us and she said, hey, I have a podcast. I talked about the VBAC link in our podcast and I thought you should know. And I was like, oh, well, that's so nice. Let's listen to the podcast. And then I listened to the podcast and it's the Rico Allen from Atlanta Falcons. Wait, is that right?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Oh my gosh, I thought.
No, it's perfect.
It's because I said his like
full name.
Yeah.
name.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah.
It was Rico Allen.
It's
Atlanta Falcons. My husband looked him up. He's a safety. He's a really great player. And I was like, holy cow, this is like a big deal. And so I went and listened to the podcast, fell in love with these two. Like, seriously, she was so sweet. And she said so many nice things about us and our course and our podcast on her podcast. And so if you're just, it just warms my heart and makes me so happy when people reach out to us and share us with other people. And so this one was an extra special surprise, and we are big football fans in my house. And so thank you so much for reaching out. And
thank you guys.
Glad.
Thank you guys so much. I mean, every bit of it. It's just so crazy the way that things come, full circle, that like I'm sitting here talking to you guys now, that my birth has passed, our baby is here. And it's unbelievable because I spent so much of my pregnancy and my preparation listening to your podcast just to mentally prepare and to educate myself. And I feel like knowledge is power, especially when it comes to doing things that I don't want to say aren't really the norm, but VBACs are definitely a special thing. And then VBACs after 2 cesareans, those are special as well. And you hear even less about them. So for me, I was just trying to absorb every bit of knowledge that I could during my pregnancy, and you guys provided so much of that to me. Knowledge and just confidence. When you hear other women share their stories, it gives you confidence in the fact that you can do the same. So I really meant everything that I said, and I encourage everybody, honestly, everybody that reaches out to me about it to use the resources that you guys have provided. So thank you.
Well, we appreciate that.
So I have 3 children now. My first, he was Breech. At 38 weeks, I thought that I was in labor. He had been head down my entire pregnancy. I woke up in a wet bed thinking, oh my gosh, my water has broken. I was so excited. I was a first-time mom. It was like 7 o'clock in the morning. I had a doctor's appointment at 9 a.m. So I figured I'll just go to my appointment and see. I wasn't having contractions, nothing that led me to think, oh, we should go right to the hospital. So I waited for my appointment, got there. They did the ultrasound and they were like, actually, this is not amniotic fluid. Your child has flipped from being head down to now being in the breech position, and the pressure from that caused your bladder, to,
oh my gosh,
it caused you to pee. So here I am thinking I'm finally in labor, my first baby, and turns out it wasn't labor. It was my head down, my entire pregnancy baby flipping to a breech position 2 weeks before his due date. So being a young mom, not really knowing any better, I took my doctor's advice and we scheduled a C-section. And that was just what we did. I came to terms with it. I didn't think a whole lot about it because I thought that it was my only option. So coming around 19 months later, so our first 2 are 19 months apart, I was pregnant with our daughter and I desired to have a VBAC. I didn't educate myself on it. I thought that saying to my practice and to my provider, I really would like to VBAC. I thought that would be enough. Again, looking back, hindsight is always 20/20, and I realize now that is not enough. even if your provider tells you that they are VBAC supportive, I think it's very important to find out just how truly VBAC supportive your provider is, which I did not do. So when I was having a little bit of prodromal labor is what they ended up calling it, they didn't give me the option to induce at all. It was just, honestly, what was said to me was, right now you have a healthy living baby inside of you. And if you go home tonight and come back at another time, we're not sure that will be the case. So as any woman, I think, would do, you say, okay, my baby is my priority. Let's just do this thing.
Yeah.
So that is how my second cesarean happened. And that one was much tougher for me to come to terms with, just because I think deep down in my heart, I knew that that wasn't really what it had to be. But when you're faced with a statement like that, and you're so strongly emotional at the end of your pregnancy anyway, you're ready to meet your baby, and you're impatient and you're frustrated, and then a doctor, a person that you trust, says something like that to you, it's not really the time for you to, I don't want to say argue it, but to even kind of question at that point. At least for me, it wasn't. So we did the C-section. It went smoothly. But coming home to another child while recovering from a second C-section, I was like, if there are any more babies in our future, I cannot do this again. Just because with the first one, you're able to rest. It's you and it's the baby. But when you come home and you have toddlers, or in my case, a 19-month-old that needed me, the physical recovery was so much more challenging because of having another child need me, if that makes a lot of sense. So I was like, if there's more babies in our future, I am going to do everything that I can to not have to have another cesarean. So I kind of put it on the back burner. We waited 2.5 years between our second and our third to get pregnant. And I went to the same practice again. And at my 12-week appointment, I asked them, I said, I'm really interested in what my options are as far as birth goes this time around. And they said to me, well, you don't have an option. You've had 2 C-sections. So this one will be a C-section as well. And we'll schedule it for 39 weeks. If anything is not reassuring, we could do it as early as 38. And I felt defeated in that moment. And I looked at my doctor and I said, is there any way I can at least just be given a trial of labor? Like, I just don't understand why this has to be a C-section just because the past 2 were. Like, can I at least have a shot at giving this a try? And the doctor said, no, it's against our hospital policy. Once you've had 2 cesareans, all of your future pregnancies will end in C-section. And then she said to me, the thing that I knew in my bones was, it was the ultimate reason I knew I had to really educate myself and take matters into my own hands. And she said to me, and you should truly contemplate having your tubes tied while we have you on the table.
Oh my gosh.
And
so
in that
annoying
moment, I was like,
Yeah.
First of all, I had horrible hyperemesis. I was in and out of the hospital this time around. I mean, it was a brutal first trimester. And then to hear her say that to me, and even with everything I had gone through, being so sick, being in and out of the hospital, I knew that wasn't right. You know what I'm saying? And anyone that's had hyperemesis out there, that is the pits. Like, it does not get a whole lot harder than surviving with that. And then to hear her say to me, like, you should have your tubes tied. And even in that moment, the fact that didn't cross my mind as being an acceptable thing, I was like, there's no way that this is going to be the right practice for me this time along. So I continued with them until my anatomy scan. And I just was kind of doing my own homework, my own research on the side. I discovered your podcast between that 12-week appointment and my 20-week anatomy scan. And I literally binge listened to every single one of them on my daily walks, or whenever the kids would nap, whenever I would have time, I listened to them. And I just remember making mental notes of like trends that I would hear in multiple women's stories. And I started a little notepad with all the things that stood out to me, different types of resources people had mentioned. And I took all of that into my own hands and just kind of explored for myself. So I went back for my anatomy scan. I ended up having a different provider. It's like a practice of 8, so you never really knew who you were going to get. And this time I felt like, okay, I have more knowledge than I had at the 12-week appointment. I know terminology now. I have a little bit of policy behind me that I've read about as far as the hospital goes, as far as the state goes. And I felt better equipped to truly have that conversation. But I was mentally prepared walking into that appointment to know, okay, there's a very good chance that I might leave here today and never return to this practice again. And I was ready for that. So had a conversation with my provider. This one was much more open-minded. And I just said, these are my reasons. We want to have more children. I had a lot of scar tissue build up after my second cesarean. And I knew this because when my husband and I tried to get pregnant this third time around, it took quite a bit longer. And that wasn't something in the past that we had dealt with. So I went to a naturopath doctor who does something called thermography scanning, which is essentially where they use this like high definition camera lens that can pick up deviations in temperature, and they photograph different regions of your body. And if there's temperature that's higher in one, areas will show up red, if that makes sense.
Yes,
so
this
my
is like
whole
so interesting to me.
I know.
In fact, I want to get a hold of your doc that did it, and I want to interview them.
Come to Atlanta.
Seriously,
Can we like bunk with you and Rico and your kids?
Come hang out, bring your kids, and go see this doctor, because I had to seek her out because I went to my OB and they're like, there's nothing wrong. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense because something's not working and nothing has changed, So it turns out I had so much inflammation in my lower abdomen that she thought it was endometriosis until I told her, I'm like, well, I've actually had two cesareans. And she's like, well, this is scar tissue. So she helped me take some supplements, taught me just like some different things that I could do. And I was pregnant within the month, which is truly incredible. But it does show that, there was past trauma from those C-sections before. And that was even more of a driving factor for me to fight as hard as I could to not have to put my body through that a third time, if not absolutely necessary. So I had that conversation after the anatomy scan. This doctor was way more understanding, and she was like, look, you sound like you really know what you're talking about. She's like, I'm going to be honest with you. She's like, you are the perfect candidate to have a trial of labor. She said, you have had 2 lower transverse incisions. She said, we sutured you up super well both times. She said, the only problem is that we are not a practice that can give this to you. And I said, okay, but I was prepared for her to tell me I was an absolute crazy woman. So for her to respond that way to me was like a win. I was like, great, you're not disrespecting me by any means, like you're understanding where I'm coming from. And so I just said, is there anybody that you could recommend for me, to interview, or just, where do I really go from here? And I had already had a few names up my sleeve that I had researched in the Atlanta area. And she said, well, I'm not really from here. I've only been in the state 2 years. She's like, so let me talk to a few people and I'll get back to you by the end of the afternoon. So I went out in the parking lot that day and I just felt like, okay, I'm going to make this happen. And I went out and I called Dr. Tate, which is the number and the name of the person that I had saved in my phone as the person I thought that I would work with if I really did change practices. So I called and I was introduced myself, and the woman that answered the phone it was such a breath of fresh air, because I called and I said, hi, my name is Grace Allen. I was just calling because I've had 2 C-sections and I really want to have a VBAC. And she was like, okay, great. How can we help you? And I was like, I'd love to come in for a consult. And so I got in 2 weeks later, ended up going and meeting with Dr. Tate in Atlanta. And he was the most honest provider in the sense that he didn't tell me everything that I wanted to hear, essentially. He's like, you know what? You've had 2 C-sections and I can't promise you that I can give you a VBAC. He said, but what I can promise you is that if this pregnancy ends up in a C-section, it's because it absolutely had to be for the safety and the health of yourself and your baby.
Awesome.
And when he said that to me, I was like, you know what? This is my guy. And I'll be very honest to anybody that's listening in the Atlanta area, or even like Tennessee, people travel to see him. His office is super dated. You would walk in, and if you're looking for like glitz and glam and all of those things, you are not going to get it here. Like, I'm just going to tell you right now, like if it was my first pregnancy, I would have turned around and ran out the door. But you know better when you've done things a few times, and it's not about any of those things. So he provided me with, from start to finish, the best care. And I didn't become his patient until I was 27 weeks pregnant. So I went in for my 27-week appointment. Baby was head down. Everything was great. You know, we discussed all of the risks that come with the VBAC, all of the risks that come with the repeat C-section. And that's something that I really want to touch on, is that prior to this doctor, I had only ever heard about the risks of a VBAC. Nobody talks about the risks of repeat C-section.
Yep, exactly.
So
You're
this
exactly
is
right.
something that totally blew my mind when I realized this, because my practice before, and every person that I communicated to, like, I want to have a VBAC, the first thing everyone said to me is, well, your uterus is going to rupture.
Right.
But no one ever said to me, oh, a third C-section causes X, Y, and Z and all of these other things. It was almost like this one-sided argument of, have a VBAC and your uterus is going to rupture, or have a C-section and you're going to be completely safe and healthy. And in reality, obviously that's not the case.
Well, and they even ruled out the fact that, like, you weren't getting pregnant and stuff like that, to like, oh, it's fine, everything's normal. But it's like, well, let's look at the history. Like, you have had 2 cesareans. There is a chance you have scar tissue that's affecting this. You know,
absolutely.
Like, that, absolutely. They just completely brushed it off there, even, you know.
They did. And that's something that I think that you really, again, it's doctors. I'm all about medicine. I actually wanted to be a doctor. I have the utmost respect for doctors and for the medical field. I don't want to sound like I'm coming down on anybody, because that's not the case. Like, I strongly believe that there is a time and a place for C-sections. Absolutely. Like, they do save lives, but I also believe that there's a lot of them that could have been prevented. And that's just the way that I feel. So I was very thankful with Dr. Tate that he laid out the risks of both sides. And he was that way up until the very end. So 27 weeks, baby was still head down. We were on track. Everything was looking great. I show up at 30 weeks and he was just doing, I can't remember what they call it when they like just touch your stomach to figure out baby's position. But he was like, you know what? We need to do a quick ultrasound. I'm not sure this baby's still head down. And my heart just sank, because I felt like, okay, I have this great provider. I gained the courage to walk away from the practice that delivered both of my past babies, that I have this relationship with, that I've sent girlfriends to, that I speak highly of. And now my baby is Breech. And it was just, it was honestly devastating. I'm not going to sugarcoat it at all.
I feel like I can relate, because with my VBAC after C-section baby, he kept going Breech. He went Breech like 3 times. And like, we would flip him. And I kept telling my midwife, I swear, if the reason why I have to have a 3rd C-section is because this baby is Breech, I'm going to be pissed. Like,
yes.
Come on. I've never had a baby go Breech, like, ever. Why is this baby going Breech? And it was so just defeating every time it'd go in and she'd be like, crap, he's Breech again.
I know. And it's honestly, and it's one of those things where, you know, so Dr. Tate was like, you know, the baby is Breech, but the good news is you're only 30 weeks. He's like, there's plenty of time between now and when you deliver that this baby will surely find its way down. He's like, 3 out of every 100 babies are Breech at term. And I was like, okay, so there's the silver lining. So then this is like Wednesday, the beginning of March. Thursday, all of the COVID-19 stuff breaks out, and I get a phone call from the office saying, hey, we're going to just do strictly online visits up until your 36-week appointment. If anything goes wrong, obviously call us. So I was in the dark from weeks 30 to 36 at home during COVID-19, trying to figure out what position my baby was in. So I didn't have the appointments like I normally would, where I would have confirmation of baby's position. I didn't have a provider that was able to help me manipulate the baby at this point. It was just, I was home with my other 2 children, praying, like asking the universe. I was doing moxibustion on my back porch every night, like all of the spinning babies techniques. I was visiting a Webster chiropractor. I mean, when I tell you I was doing all of the things to flip this baby, like I truly mean that I was. And it became almost to the point where it was unhealthy for my mind, because it was all that I could focus on. But I knew, I was like, if I don't get this baby head down, like it's not going to be okay. You know, we're going to end up in a C-section. And so finally 36 weeks comes along and I get my first in-office appointment after 6 weeks, and we do the ultrasound and he's like, this baby's really comfy. It's still breech. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I told him, I'm like, I've been on spinning babies. I've been doing all of the things. And he's like, at this point, he's like, you need to consider, and again, laid out all of the risks, the pros, the cons of an ECV, which is the external version when they try to manipulate the baby. And I told him, I was like, let me like do a little bit of homework and let me get back to you about it. Like, I didn't just want to go for it without talking to my husband, without weighing the pros and cons. And I remember hearing some celebrity had it done and said it was the most painful thing they've ever encountered, which at this point I was willing to take on the pain, but I wanted to make sure that the benefits outweighed potential negative outcomes. So I went home, did all my research, talked to my husband, and decided I was going to give it a try, because I know myself and I knew that I didn't want to leave any cards on the table. I wanted to give this everything I had so that however it ended up, I was able to know that I did everything, because that's what would give me peace. So we decided to do it. It was unsuccessful and it was painful. There's no doubt about it. He actually performs ECV in his office, which is a little bit different than a lot of providers. So most people will have you go into the hospital. They will administer drugs. You can either do like an epidural, or some people will have, it begins with a B and I can't remember. Do you guys know the name of the muscle relaxer that they use? I can't remember.
I know what you're
Albuta something maybe?
It's something like that.
Albuterine.
Something like that.
Something
So
like that.
Shoot that in your arm and that helps your muscles to relax. And they say that helps to easier manipulate the baby into a head down position. So he doesn't do any of these things. He's successful. His success rate for ECV is like 9 out of 10. So again, I'm like, great, these odds are in my favor. This is going to be fantastic.
Oh my gosh, you poor thing. Like, my heart is just aching.
We do the ECV in his office. I have my mask and my gloves on, like trying to breathe through the pain with a mask. And my husband can't be there because of COVID. So I'm completely alone. And it's not successful. And at that point, I was driving home in my car. I'm now 36 weeks pregnant. And I just remember saying to myself, like, is there something that I'm missing here? Like, is there something that I'm meant to learn from this, that I'm just overlooking? Like, maybe I'm trying to be too in control of this, or maybe I'm focusing on the wrong things. Like, for me, that's how I try to look at stuff that happens in my life that is hard, because I feel like if we just get stuck in the emotion of it and we don't think about the lesson, it's harder to move forward. So I was driving home. I was obviously devastated, crying in the car, thinking like, okay, this is the end, but I was like, what am I missing? And for some reason, I just kept hearing like surrender. Like, I just need to surrender. Like, obviously keep doing all the things I'm doing and continue to try, but just maybe like let go a little bit of the specifics of this whole thing. So I still did my moxibustion. I still saw my chiropractor. I still did my prenatal massage. I still prayed about it. I still walked, I still slept on my left side. I mean, I was sleeping with a peanut ball between my legs on my left side for weeks. Like, that's not comfortable. I was literally doing all of it. And it didn't end up, the baby didn't end up flipping. And so the next appointment we talked, and he was like, well, I am one of the only providers still that will deliver vaginal breech. And I was like, really? And he was like, yes, I will. He said there has to be, there is a set of guidelines that the baby has to fall within in order for me to consider it. He said, because at the end of the day, a healthy baby and a healthy mom is the goal, so as long as the baby falls within these certain ranges and it's something that you're open to, I would be willing to deliver this baby breech. So I asked him, I said, what are these guidelines? And he has this ratio. So he was an engineer before he went back to medical school. And it's super cool to see the way he's brought that into his practice. So he has this ratio of 1.1, which the baby has to fall within. So the baby has first, the baby has to be frank breech, meaning it's completely folded in half with feet up. It cannot be footling, because then you have the risk of like the cord dropping and all of the other things. So the baby, first of all, has to be frank breech. And then second of all, the ratio of belly circumference to head circumference has to fall within that range of 1.1. And the whole concept behind that is that if a mother is able to push the abdomen with the legs of a baby out on her own, there's no reason that she shouldn't be able to get a head out that's significantly smaller.
Yeah.
So this is how he safeguards himself from like head entrapment and all of these scary things that can happen. So at 37 weeks, he sent me down to a specialist to have a growth scan done to determine 1, baby's position, and then 2, the ratio. And at that appointment at 37 weeks, the baby was shown to be footling breech, which is the one type of breech that cannot be delivered. And the ratio was not within the safe range, meaning that the baby's head was still the largest part of its body. So I left the hospital specialist.
Oh my gosh, you poor
37
thing.
weeks. Like, this is just, it's unbelievable at this point. Like, I was like, this is almost comical now. Like, I had to laugh about it, although I obviously cried about it too, because I was like, this is just the wildest ride of my entire life. So at that point, I called and talked to him, and I was like, what are we looking like? What is this looking like now? And he was like, this is looking like you have 3 weeks, and he's like, and I'm going to let you go to 41. So you have 4 weeks for this baby to find its way head down, or else we have to do a C-section. We cannot deliver a footling breech. So my next appointment's 38 weeks. I go in, and we were ultrasounding every week at this point, just because it had all been so crazy. And the baby was somehow back to being frank breech, which was incredible, and had gained almost a pound since the growth scan. So now the baby fell within the safe range for breech vaginal.
Yay!
Right? So this is 38 weeks now. Baby's in the proper breech position, gaining enough weight, and every ounce that they gain works in that ratio's favor, because it's making the abdomen of the baby obviously larger. So the longer you can stay pregnant if you're trying to do a breech vaginal, the better off you are to have success, which is a really interesting to think about that, because you would think like, oh my gosh, the baby's just getting bigger, that's going to be more difficult. But in reality, it's the opposite of that, because it's safeguarding the mother and the baby to be sure that the mom is able to get that baby out.
That is the coolest thing I have learned.
Isn't that cool?
Like the ratio, like the engineering and the mathematics and the like logistics of all of it. I'm just like mind blown over here. Like,
so this is what I'm saying. So like his office might be so dated and like just so old school, but that stuff does not matter. Like his brain and his care and the way that he practices is worth every bit of all of that.
That is super cool.
So I had a doula, which is another thing that I want to mention. I obviously with COVID ended up not getting to use her. So I hired her at 27 weeks, and then we did everything over the phone, essentially. Even through my delivery, I was texting her as I was making decisions in the hospital. So that was something I just wanted to make sure that I didn't forget. And this was the first pregnancy I used a doula. I didn't use one for my first 2. And although it was a different experience because of COVID, it was something that I really recommend for women who are looking to VBAC, or even women that are just looking to have a provider that is willing to do a breech vaginal, just because you need all the support you can get when you make decisions to do things like this that aren't really of the norm. You have to protect yourself. You have to protect your mental state. And that's another thing that I think is really important, is gain your knowledge for yourself and form your own opinions before you share with the world what it is you're wanting to do, because fear is a very real thing. And
Absolutely.
You are very vulnerable when you're when you're making decisions like this and you're trying to do something that's pretty uncommon. So those are just 2 things I wanted to make sure I noted. So here I am, 39 weeks, baby's still frank breech. I'll just call it good breech moving forward, and ratios getting better. Everything's great. At this point though, I'm starting to wonder, like, okay, my 3rd baby, I was having Braxton Hicks, but nothing that was making me think like that labor was coming. I never lost my mucus plug. Like my water didn't break. And I was just starting to feel like, oh my gosh, like, is labor going to start on its own? Because I had never gone into labor before. And then your mind can become your enemy, and you start thinking like, wait a minute, if it's not the baby's head that's pressing on my cervix, like how is my body going to dilate? How am I going to open? How is it going to know? And you just can go down this rabbit trail of like a place you don't want to be. And so I really had to fight myself that last week of just staying in a good mental state and reminding myself like my body was made to do this, and I have to be patient right now. And however this works out, like I'm going to have a healthy baby at the end of it. And I know that I fought my absolute hardest. So 39 and 6, the night before my due date, I started having just like contractions. It felt like Braxton Hicks, but they kind of stopped me in my tracks every so often. And I was like, that's really, interesting. I didn't say anything to anybody. I obviously, I told my husband, and that night I would have about 1 or 2 an hour that would wake me from my sleep, and just, they were more uncomfortable. And then Monday, so that was on Sunday. And then on Monday morning, I woke up and I had my 40-week doctor's appointment, and he checked my cervix. That was the first time that he did that, because I had heard from so many women on other episodes that they would think they were progressing, and then they'd be checked and find out that they either weren't dilating at all, or they weren't as far as they thought they were, and that was just like another mental block. And I had already had enough of those with the breech and the not breech and just all of it. I was like, I have to protect myself, and I only want to know the information that I really need to know. So I didn't have my cervix checked until 40 weeks. So Monday morning at my 40-week appointment, he checked me. I was 1.5 centimeters dilated and 50% effaced. So I was optimistic about that, though. I was like, you know what? This is the furthest in labor I've ever been. It might sound like nothing to other people, but to me, that meant my body was doing something. Those contractions that I was feeling were working towards a purpose. So I went home the rest of that day, and starting around 3:00, I was having about 2 or 3 an hour where I was on the ground. I mean, I couldn't stand. I was leaning over the counter, and they weren't coming every 6 minutes like they tell you to wait for at that point. They were more like 15 to 20, but when they hit, they were very painful. So I knew that things were progressing. So that night, I told my husband, I was like, I really want to try to sleep at home tonight. I feel like the baby could be coming pretty soon. But around 10:30, I had about 6 in an hour, to the point that the pain was unmanageable. And I knew that even though they weren't timing the way that labor contractions should, that there were things happening, and I didn't want to mess around, for the fact that, 1, I was a VBA2C, and then 2, that the baby was still presenting breech. So I told him, I'm like, I think we need to go to the hospital. Like, I'm tough, and this pain is like, this is something real. So we show up to the hospital at 11 p.m. and they got me back to the triage room. The nurse checked me. I was 2 centimeters and 80% effaced. So some progress from that morning. And she called Dr. Tate and asked what they wanted him, or what he wanted them to do with me. And he said, tell her to walk the halls for an hour and check her and call me back and tell me what's going on. So I was in so much pain that I was able to walk, but I was like holding the bar, and I was squatting. I was doing everything that I could, but I was just feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm only 2 centimeters and I'm only 80%. And I just didn't really know what was going to happen. I knew I didn't want an epidural right off the bat if they did admit me, because I had heard from so many stories that really slowed things down. And I just wanted my body to have a fighting chance. So I spent that hour just reminding myself of all of the women that had done this before me, and just trying to really stay in that mental space. And when the nurse came back to check me, she was like, oh my goodness. And I was not expecting to hear that. She's like, you're 4, almost 5 centimeters dilated, and your cervix, like you're 100% effaced. And I remember looking at my husband, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is actually happening. And so she called Dr. Tate. Within an hour, I went from a 2 to almost a 5, like my cervix completely effaced. And my doctor was like, all right, well, admit her, and I'm on my way in. So he got to the hospital around 1:00 in the morning. By the time he got there, I was 7 centimeters. Baby
Amazing.
Was still presenting breech, and he asked, he's like, what do you want to do about pain management? And I was like, I want to labor as long as I can before you absolutely have to give me an epidural, if you have to. And I learned something that night that I wasn't aware of. And he said to me, he's like, well, you don't have to have an epidural. He said, but if this ends up in an emergency C-section and you don't have an epidural, he said, you will have to be put completely under with general anesthesia during your cesarean. He said, because we can't spend the time placing an epidural to do local anesthetic if it becomes an emergency. He said, so really, this is a decision you need to make. He said, would you be okay if this ends that way and being put to sleep during the birth of your child? And we hadn't found out the gender of this baby either. Like, there were so many surprises and things that I was looking forward to in the birth that at that moment, I just knew, like, I did not want to be put to sleep. I wanted to be if it ended in a C-section, I could have accepted it and I would have embraced it for every bit of it, but I would have really kicked myself for trying to be, I don't want to say stubborn, but for putting off something that could have been prevented. So I ended up getting the epidural at 8 centimeters. And then we did like the side to side in the bed every 15 minutes. My nurse helped flip me. I had my leg up on the little stirrup thing they use to try to elevate to get baby to descend. And my contractions completely stopped. So I had a gut feeling that was going to be the case just because I had heard that from so many other people. And so Dr. Tate came in and he was like, you're almost there. He's like, you're 8.5 centimeters. He's like, but your contractions went from being every 4 minutes to like almost being 20 minutes apart. He's like, so we can attempt, he's like, we can break your water because my water bag was bulging. It was going to happen anyway. So he broke my water just to give my body a little bit of like a natural kickstart. And he said, we're going to wait for 30 minutes and track your contractions before we decide, Pitocin or whatever it is we're going to do moving forward. So in that 30 minutes, I did dilate to a 9, but my contractions were still very slow and not nearly as strong as prior to the epidural. So they gave me the most minimal dosage of Pitocin. It was like 0.2, I think. And within 1 minute of that being in my body, my contractions started hitting like every 3 minutes again. And
your body was like, okay, let's go.
My body's like, okay, let's get this thing done. So I was very nervous about the Pitocin, but he was like, we're going to do the most minimal amount. He's like, you're almost there. Like we need a little something just to get you back to where you were. And so honestly, it was within 2 or 3 minutes. I was at a 10. He checked baby's position, and after breaking my water, it allowed the baby to drop, which is the thing with breech is it's harder for them to get into the birth canal because it's not their head. So the baby dropped and he was like, okay. He's like, are you ready to give this a go? And I remember hearing those words and it was like, oh my goodness, like this is really happening. And he's like, another thing that I learned that I didn't know is that with VBAC, you deliver in the OR, at least at my hospital I did, I think because I had 2 prior and because baby was breech. So they wheeled my hospital bed into the operating room. And that was just so that we were there if needed, which really gave me peace of mind, but it was something that I wasn't really expecting. So if anyone listening to this is in a similar situation, maybe that's something to ask ahead of time so that you're not caught off guard. For me, it didn't bother me just because I had delivered both of my babies before in an operating room. So maybe it was just something that I was used to, but I could see how that could kind of catch you off guard if you weren't expecting it. So maybe just a question to ask your provider. So they wheel me into the OR. On the way there, my doctor asks me, he's like, we are a teaching hospital. He's like, all of the residents just got on the floor for the day. He's like, would you be open to people observing? And I was like, absolutely. And the reason that I felt so confident in saying that is because I realized that my doctor is older. And the fact that he was able and willing to take a chance on me to deliver my baby breech, that came from him having years of experience doing this. And what happens when he retires and there's another woman like me in a few years, and the only reason she can't achieve a VBAC is because her baby is breech, and there was nobody following my doctor that learned the skill to do it. So it wasn't for me personally. I'm like, I don't really want, like, this is not going to be cute, like this butt coming out of me. Like, it's not going to be something that's going to be super attractive for anybody to see. But I wasn't thinking about myself in that moment. I was thinking about all of the people down the road. And so I was like, of course they can be there. So in this little tiny OR, there was my doctor, my husband, my nurse, Abigail, who was honestly an angel on earth. Like, that was God totally orchestrated her to be my nurse that night because she was exactly what I needed. The entire NICU team has to be there for VBAC, which is something else I didn't know. And then these 8 residents plus the anesthesiologist. So there were honestly probably 30 people in the OR for the birth of our baby. So we get in there and he is briefing the resident that's helping assist him. And I hear him talking in all of these terms about, okay, well, if this is the presentation when it comes out, this is what we have to do, so on and so forth. And his other rule is that the mother has to be able to push the baby out to the nipples before he's able to intervene. Whoa. So this is another him safeguarding himself, is that if you can get the baby out up to the nipples, everything after the nipples is smaller than what's already come. So he had me do 2 practice pushes on my contraction, and with my 2 practice pushes, the baby's bottom was coming down. So he was confident that I was going to be able to do this. So I ended up pushing for 15 minutes.
Whoa, that's awesome.
15 minutes. And
I'm like hanging on to every word right now. What's next? What's next?
So I had 3 really great contractions where I pushed 3 times through each one. So my first contraction with my first set of pushes was really good. My second one hit so quickly after I didn't really have the chance to catch my breath, so that wasn't as strong. And then by the third one, the baby was out. So he was really awesome about telling me when to push and when to stop to allow my body to adjust, to the baby coming through the birth canal. So I will say one of my biggest fears with the breech birth was what it was going to do to my vagina. Like, I was like, no, you can't find that anywhere. Like, people don't talk about that. So I just had to ask him, like, what's going to happen to me physically? It was something I was worried about. And he was like, there's a way that I help women push. He's like, that I honestly see more trauma with babies that come head first. And so that was very reassuring to me. And I didn't tear. I had no trauma, like, by the grace of God. And baby was born. Everything was healthy. It was a little girl, which we didn't have a gut feeling at all during our pregnancy, but our son, the whole time I was pregnant, kept telling me, a baby sister, it's a baby sister. And so many people say, like, your kids know. And so in my heart, I was like, this is probably a girl. And so when she was born and my husband got to announce the gender, he was holding my leg and he's like, it's a girl. It was so magical, and she was healthy and everything was great. And we got wheeled back to the room that I was laboring in. And we didn't have a name picked out for her at all because we didn't know gender. I didn't know how this whole thing was going to end. It was just, there were so many just deviations along the way that I was like, I need to meet this baby face to face, before I'm able to give it a name. And so we get back to the room where I labored. I can't remember what it's called, but I had to deliver in the OR. So once we got back, Dr. Tate brought all the residents in that was able to witness the birth and kind of like debrief them on what they saw. And he said to the residents, and this is how she got her name, he said, most of the time in a delivery, the words that everybody waits to hear is, the baby is crowning. He said, well, obviously what you just witnessed, he said, that wasn't the case. He said, this baby was mooning. So we ended up naming our daughter Luna, which means moon in Italian. So she is our little Luna, which I love the name and think it's a beautiful name anyway. But I just felt like, wow, what a testament to that whole journey. And then for the doctor, for that to be the first thing that he said, not even 5 minutes after she was born. And we spent this whole pregnancy wondering, what are we going to name this baby? And it was like, she chose her name for herself. So we have Luca is our son, Lennon is our daughter, and now we have Luna.
Oh my gosh, it's perfect.
As our baby. So it's like incredible the way she just fit right into the flow of things, and she's healthy. I cannot get over how incredible I feel, like just the difference in recovery from a C-section to a vaginal birth. It's just, that's enough to make it worth fighting for, just the recovery in itself. So that's my story. We did it. I can't believe it, but it was incredible. And again, I just thank you guys for allowing women to share their stories, because this is how we can find our strength and find our power. And it really means a lot to me.
Do you know what? I was thinking while you were telling your story, I was listening to your most recent podcast where I was like waiting for baby news. And you said when you and Rico first started and moved to Georgia, and you were first on the team, and you were really intimidated with all the other players' wives, and because you were like the new people, right? And you got in the elevator with the starting quarterback's wife, and she just greeted you with warmth and love and kindness, and you were so surprised. By your name. That's right. I remember that.
Yeah, like, but also warmth and kindness.
Yeah, and it made you feel so so good, so much better, right? About all the circumstances. And then you went on to say, now you are the one that's been there for a while, and you get to welcome people like that and make them feel like they're just as important. And I was like, well, gosh darn it, it's the same way with sharing your VBAC story. Like, we've all been there. True. We've been pregnant. We've had our cesareans, and we're like nervous. We don't know what to expect. And we're walking into this elevator that is birth. See all my like analogies or my,
I love this. Making? I love this.
We're walking into this birth, and the people that are in the elevator with you are going to impact how you feel about your birth and your success. Even though I don't know how you can be, I don't know how you can fail at being like a football player's wife, but like, but seriously, like, I don't know, maybe there is, I don't know about that.
I totally know where you're going with this.
but seriously though, like, and now look at you, you're here, you've been through like all of it. We could do an entire class just on your birth and all of the things that you went through. But now you're here, and you get to inspire all the other women with your story that are walking up to the elevator right now, intimidated and don't know what to expect.
I have chills.
And I just love that. I have chills too.
I have chills. I might be cheesy or postpartum and hormonal, but I have chills all over my body. But that's what it's about. I mean, that's like the heart of being a woman. I mean, I think that we sell ourselves short when we aren't willing to be vulnerable and to be open. And it's scary. Absolutely. Because that could have not went in my favor. And then I poured my heart out to the world, about the desires of my heart. And that could have not worked out. You know what I mean? But whether it worked out or it didn't, I hope that by sharing my story and being brave enough to do that, that gives somebody else the strength to do it too.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say is, I, for a little while, was like hesitant to tell anybody my plans and everything. Because if it didn't work out in the way I was hoping, like, I didn't want to be like, oh, well, look at me. Like, I just preached this and, whatever. And
it didn't happen.
Yeah, but I'm so glad that I did. And I'm so glad that you did, because you are educating people every day. I mean, people are listening and following and watching your story and listening to you. And I think that everything that you've shared along the way is so inspiring. And honestly, all you're doing is planting a seed for everybody to go out and educate themselves further. And that's where it has to go. Like, we all have to grow in our own ways. And for you, like you said, being brave enough to share this journey that is vulnerable, like you were vulnerable. You're vulnerable.
Gosh, totally.
And here you are sharing with such a broad audience. You don't even know the people you're sharing with, right? And like can't even put a face to a lot of these people who follow you. And so for you to be able to go out and share this with confidence, saying like, look, I feel confident in the decision that I am making. I am confident in the journey that I am taking, whether it works out or it doesn't. This is what I'm doing. And I feel okay. And I feel proud of that. And I think
having resources like you guys, I mean, we can't leave that out. I mean, that makes such a difference to feel championed and to feel supported. And then not only the emotional aspect of it, but to be provided with the facts. I can't tell you how many times I flipped back through that manual when I was like, am I crazy for wanting this? Like, because the fear does get the best of you if you let it. But if you can just ground yourself with knowledge and facts and remind yourself of those things with courses like the VBAC link and just listening to other women's stories, I think that you have the best, the odds are in your favor.
Yeah, totally.
May the odds be ever in your favor.
In your favor.
And not be worried about changing providers. If you realize at the last minute that maybe not the right place for you to be and things like that, just taking the bold steps that you have taken.
You have to
achieve these goals. And so we're very proud of you, and we're very honored that you are here with us. I appreciate you guys
so much. Thank you so much for having me. This is really, like I said at the beginning, like just the way it comes full circle. I spent so much of my pregnancy listening, and now here I am getting to talk, and it's just truly incredible. So thank you guys.
Oh, well, thank you. We need to connect. Like, we need to just meet and have lunch. Okay, so you're in Georgia and we're in Utah. So what's middle? Like Texas? Oklahoma.
We
I don't
could do
know.
that.
Maybe
And
Colorado.
Wait, but here's
I
the
don't know.
thing. If NFL season is actually open and normal, I think we play 2 Texas teams. So we could potentially make that happen this year.
Or if you ever play in Denver,
See?
that's like a
that'd be
9-hour
cool.
drive for us.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Do you have any scoop on that you're allowed to share on the plans?
Literally, I know nothing. We're even day to day in our house. Like my husband's been working via Zoom, but every day, you know, with however the world is changing, like they could call and be like, all right, tomorrow everyone's meeting in the facility. Yeah. So no, we know nothing. But I really look forward to knowing something because it would be super nice to be able to like plan our life a little bit, you know?
I hear you.
Like to know what we're looking forward to these next few months.
Well, and we had to cancel, like we were planning to go to Louisiana, Green Bay, Wisconsin, and Miami, Florida this year to teach and train doulas, but we had to cancel all of that. And so now maybe we can just go to Atlanta and then we can do a course in Atlanta.
Just come to Atlanta.
Yeah, because Georgia needs some serious help. Let's be honest.
Let me help you.
Okay, perfect. We'll do it.
Seriously, whatever you need. You guys are the best.
Oh, well, we sure just love talking to you. I just love how you existed in your vulnerability. You let yourself open up. You let yourself see maybe what you could do differently and how to change how you were feeling and how things went. And I think that living in the vulnerability is where we really grow and learn, especially during pregnancy, which is a really vulnerable time. But thank you so much for spending your time with us, and especially on such short notice. I'm just so glad that everything worked out the way it did for you. And I've just been seriously like every day checking for updates and checking for new podcast episode. And I'm just hanging on every word. And so we're so grateful for you for reaching out.
Thank you guys. It's so mutual. Thank you for everything you do. I can't wait. Can't wait to hear it. Thanks, guys.
Would you like to be a guest on the podcast? Head over to thevbaclink.com/share and submit your story. For more information on all things VBAC, including online and in-person VBAC classes, the VBAC blog, and Julie and Megan's bios, head over to thevbaclink.com. Congratulations on starting your journey of learning and discovery with the VBAC Link.